Hello, and welcome to the Word on the Streets December Book Talk. This month, we're excited to be featuring Kai Cheng Thom on her new book for young readers, For Laika, the dog who learned the name of the stars. In the guest interviewer seat, we have Kai Yun Ching, illustrator of the book, and Kai Cheng's previous illustrator collaborator on From the Stars in the Sky to the Fish in the Sea. Before we dive into our discussion, we need to recognize the land we occupy. The Toronto of today exists because of the Toronto Purchase, also known as Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation in 1805 with a final claim settlement in 2010. Watts Toronto also recognizes the history of the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and the Seneca nations in this territory. The place in which Watts operates is the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to care for and share the resources around the Great Lakes in peace. Toronto, or Toronto, is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples with long histories on this land, and acknowledging this is only the first step in building a practice of land stewardship and Indigenous solidarity that honors these peoples. We encourage you to educate yourself about the land you occupy wherever you're tuning in from. And now a bit of background on this month's guest. Kai Cheng Thom is a writer, performance artist, and community healer in Toronto. She's an author whose oeuvre includes a novel, collections of poetry, a memoir, and collected essays. Kai Cheng won the Writers' Trust of Canada's Dayne Ogilvie Prize for LGBTQ Emerging Writers in 2017. Welcome, Kai Cheng. Kai Yun Ching is a community-based consultant, educator, and illustrator. They edited and published Children's Stories, a collection of tales written by children with the publishing collective Quilted Creatures in 2016. Kai Yun Ching.
Hi.
For Laika, The Dog Who Learned the Names of the Stars was released in November 2021 with Arsenal Pulp Press, and I'll leave it to you both to discuss more. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having us. Thank you to Maya. Thank you to Word on the Street, Toronto. Yun Ching, it's so nice to see you.
It's been too long. It's been too long.
Way too long. For the viewers out there, Yun Ching and I have known each other for, I think, 12 years now.
Has it been that long? Oh, yeah. That makes me very happy. We used to be roommates.
We were roommates. Yun Ching was once also briefly my boss at work. And now we have a writer-illustrator relationship.
Yeah.
And, yes, Yun Ching knows so much about me that the world doesn't know, and hopefully...
We'll never learn.
We'll never, maybe a little bit in this interview, but just remember, whatever you reveal, I have material to reveal of my own.
Excellent. Mutual blackmail.
Exactly. Okay. Well, I thought it would be fun if I asked you a question people usually ask me. Is that okay?
Sure.
All right. So the question is, this book is called For Laika, The Dog Who Learned the Names of the Stars. And I'm just glancing over here to see where my copy of it is, but it's not close at hand. So
I'll go grab mine.
Oh, perfect. Yes, do that. I'm going to quickly, I had it here, and now it's not here. As soon as people are watching this, oh no. There we go. See, what would I do without you? So, For Laika, The Dog Who Learned the Names of the Stars. It is a historical... based telling of the story of Laika, who was a real-life dog, who was also the first mammal to orbit the Earth in the Russian satellite Sputnik 2. But what is the book about for you? Why is this story important to you?
That's such a good question, and I think each time I'm asked or need to reflect on it, I have a different answer, because I think the book has so many dimensions. I think it's a story about loss. It's a story about grief. It's also a story about love and of community. So it's basically the story about, like Kai Cheng said, Kai Cheng Thom, when he's saying your full name, but that Kai Cheng said about this first dog who went into space. And so Laika was originally this little street dog. And then there was the scientist Vlad, who found her and offered her some food. And then they traveled together to a laboratory to kind of get trained and get ready to go to space. And throughout it, Laika saying, I will be brave, even though it felt really scary. And then ultimately she flies into the sky, looking for her parents, looking for new horizons. And do we spoil the ending or?
Yeah, the ending's out there. People know.
The ending's out there.
Yeah.
So a big part of the story is that Laika actually dies when the spaceship crashes back into the atmosphere. That's the way we depict it in the book. Historically, there was overheating that happened. But yeah, and then it's just her impact on the world, and how now when you look up at the stars, the constellations are basically the dogs that were with us before, but no longer with us. So I don't know. It's a very sweet, loving story, and I remember reading it the first time and just like bawling, and I was like, Kai Cheng, and Kai Cheng was like, excellent. I made Yun Ching cry again.
That's what I set out to do, really, in life. It's just to make you cry.
Specifically me. Yeah, exactly. And yeah. Yeah, and I don't know, for me, it's also just like kind of a testament to our friendship and our love and our care that we've had for so many years. And we've collaborated in so many different ways, and it's been such a healing and generative relationship. So the book means so many different things to me. So I'm very grateful to have experienced it with you.
Oh, thanks for saying all of that. And also, I think I just need to have you answer that question now for me instead of me stumbling my way through it. For folks who don't know, Yun Ching was one of the illustrators who collaborated with me on this book, my first children's book, From the Stars in the Sky to the Fish in the Sea as well. And I'm just so happy that we've gotten to work together and grow together over the years on these children's book projects. And thanks for saying too this thing about the ending and the sadness of the book. So a lot of people ask me why would you write such a sad children's book? And it's just I know you might have questions for me around this too, but I just really think when I was a therapist working with children in a psychiatric department of a hospital in Montreal, the story because I was your roommate at the time. All these kids would ask me these really big questions, like what happens to dogs when they die? Because a lot of them had experienced pets passing away, or why are grown-ups mean sometimes, right? These really big questions. And for me, that's just I think kids deserve real answers that are honest, but also supportive.
Yeah.
And I love what you and I have done with this book, where it's I with the words, but really you with the images as well. We try to make this really loving, beautiful, gentle answer to the question of what really happened to this dog? And, why is she important to us? And how can we continue to honor her memory by being kind to dogs now, to kind to all animals, being kind to one another, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's so true. And I don't know, I think there's something about trusting children. I think you actually said that in an interview that I read at one point. And I think one thing, it's what we are afraid to show children often comes from our own fragility, that we can't support the children enough, or we can't be there enough, or we almost over kind of project of how I would be in that situation. But in reality, it's let's see what the kid can do, because kids can approach things with such curiosity and honesty and simplicity and complexity all at the same time. And that's part of growing up. And kids have also experienced such incredible loss and grief, and to not honor that and to think that they cannot speak from that experience, I think does everyone a disservice ultimately.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I think something huge about, and I've said this in previous interviews too, is when I was a kid, I loved the sad books. I loved Where the Wild Things Are. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, we've talked about it, I could talk about this with you forever. But I loved that kind of thing because it made me feel like I wasn't alone in being sad sometimes as a kid. And so, yeah, it's just this book is really about being with young people, and to be honest, adults too, as we think about these big questions about how do we relate to the animals in our lives, and what is our beliefs really about, what are our beliefs about science and what we should do or what we should be able to do in the name of progress, all that kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's really interesting. I had a question for you.
I guess I'm ready.
How does your relationship to the text change when you see the images with it, and like even beyond that, when you see how people interact and engage in the stories? I guess maybe less so with this one because it's still relatively new, but from the stars in the sky and the fish in the sea, I would love to hear how your perception has evolved.
Oh my gosh. Well, like I think it's different working with you than it would be with any other illustrator. And I haven't worked on like really fully illustrated stories except with you, but I have had like short kind of comics illustrated,
Right.
and my covers that are the covers that weren't done by you, that is other book covers, and like kind of ideas and stuff illustrated by other artists. And I have to say, what's different, like, so with artists who aren't Yun Ching, what happens is, like, there's this moment of like, oh, like, here's how someone else saw this idea. So it's like my story, someone else's pictures, and then it's like magic because it's like this conversation about like I get to learn how other people read what I'm doing, and then they put that into their own image. But working with you, honestly, with both of these books, I was like, that's exactly how I pictured it in my mind. So it's this actually really different experience of like you and I know each other really well, and we agree on a lot of things. And people sometimes don't really understand like how deeply a children's illustrator gets into the story, but in so many ways you've spent more time with this story than me. So when I got to see the images, I was like, yeah, it's like this, like, oh wow, like the images in my mind are now on paper, and it's truly magical. And I just wanted to say too, like, for folks out there who are thinking about writing children's books or illustrating children's books, it's pretty rare and magical for a new children's book author to be able to choose their illustrator, or vice versa. And because usually publishing companies will pair like a really experienced illustrator with a really new author, or a really experienced author with a new illustrator. But you and I have got to like start together and grow together. And yeah, I think there's an extra layer there for me of like, I don't want to work with other children's books illustrators except for you. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
it's interesting that you say that, because I think a lot, for the majority of the spreads, I hold such tenderness, like hold you in my mind with such tenderness. And so for this spread, this was the first spread I actually, I'm figuring out how the camera works.
Yep.
This is the first spread that I made. And in many ways, when I'm writing, I painted "You Are So Brave." I'm also like talking about you and how much you've shown up in the world from such a place of bravery and amazing. And I know there's issues about calling people brave and all those things and tokenism and all that fun stuff. But I do think you, just knowing you throughout the years, how you really tried to step into difference and complexity with such humility and such vulnerability. I just admire that so much.
Oh, that's so lovely. I didn't know that, actually. This is like the first time I'm hearing about this on the camera. Yeah. Oh, that means a lot to me. And I mean, yeah, this is a metaphor that I haven't talked a lot about in public about this book, because it's not always super relevant to like the younger audience, but for older audiences who read the book. And the truth is, for picture books, there's always two audiences. One is the kids, and the other is the parents or adults, right?
Totally.
So for the adults out there, I really think a lot about this thing you're saying, like, like around the problematics of calling people brave. Like, anyone who is a pioneer, which is a complicated word, or a trailblazer, anyone who does something big or new, whether they're a human or a dog, it's scary and it takes courage. Like the first dog in space, the first woman CEO, the first Black politician to be elected in their area, the first anything of any kind, right? Is in many ways like the feeling of that, and both you and I have got to be like the first, of some kind. The feeling is a lot like being like a dog launched into space. It's like, whoa, what's happening? And the Earth that we knew so well is suddenly kind of differently related to us. And it's scary. We don't know what we're going to find. And so we have to be brave. And this thing about the stars telling Laika, you're so brave is really like our ancestors and our community, our
Exactly.
relationships. So yeah, you get me.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's one of the things I really loved about the book. It's like, it was always Laika saying, I will be brave first. I will be brave. And then it's her, like you said, the community and her family and her loved ones reflecting is like, you are so brave. It's an affirmation. It's not being thrust upon her.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. And so it's different from this, like, oh, you're so brave over there. Like, it's
Totally.
like, we see you being brave. And
Yeah.
this brings me to, oh, no, you first, and then me.
Please. Well, and I think it's also like, there's something in the story that honors the risk and the danger and like the violence of being brave as well. And I think that's also a part that often gets obscured, is that when you're brave, it's because there is risk and it's dangerous sometimes.
Yeah, and there are huge rewards out there. Like, it's it's amazing to be brave, and it's better to be brave when you have people to support you. Yeah, I wanted to, so now the whole world knows that I see myself as a dog launched into space. Like, that's why I'm obsessed with like this dog character who is also real. But I spent maybe like a few months with like kind of really writing her and then rewriting her and thinking about her and reading about her and all that kind of stuff. You spent so much time, like a year, I think, with like the physical form of Laika. And of course, your drawing is somewhat verisimilitudinous, like in some ways based on like the actual photographs, but also you took a lot of artistic license because Laika is blue in the book and has a yellow shadow always, which I love. And I'm just wanting to ask, like, how do you relate to Laika as a character and a real life being now that you've spent so much time creating an image of her?
Oh, that's such a lovely question. I think I just have so much love for her and so much tenderness. And I think one of the things in my drawing is that I wanted to have her have so many. So I'm looking down because I'm looking at.
Can we show her to the? Yeah.
I'm just thinking about her eyes, for example. I just really wanted her eyes to glow. That she has her own life and she has her own dreams. And I think there was something about honoring the fact that she was a little girl dog. Like, for me, there's a specific, the story would read and be experienced and would be drawn very differently if, I guess, she used different pronouns. Like, I mean, gender and dogs, it's a bit of a different conversation. But I think for me, there was a lot of that, seeing her as like a young girl and experiencing this, and that as being a metaphor. At the time that I was illustrating, it was during the pandemic. I was very, very isolated. I had just moved to BC alone, and that isolation and just like the echoes of trying to paint in isolation was so difficult. And Brian and everyone at Arsenal Pulp were so kind with that and my struggles around that. And I found that as I was able to be closer to community, so I then moved to Vancouver Island with my mom, I was finally able to start painting. And then after that, when I finally moved back to Montreal, it just kind of flowed out of me. And I think I can't necessarily distinguish Laika as a creature because I think she's so much in my memory, imagination, and I think she's also part of me. She's also part of you. I sense such kindness in her, like when I look at her, and I have such a tender response to her when I just see her. And it's weird because it's my drawing and my painting, but I want her to be well. I want her to be in the stars with her family, and I want her to meet all the dogs I've had in the past that I've loved, and all my loved ones who are gone, and so it's like wanting to build community with her as well. I don't know if that made sense, but
I think it makes total sense. Like, I have been thinking about this dog for 20 years, like, actually. And we have never met because she obviously was not around when I was a kid, but I feel her story is like a part of mine, like intertwined, and I hear you saying that as well. And like, you know, when kids ask these big questions, like what happens next after this life, right? Like it's really about like who will be there often, like, you know, will we still be together? And I like to think that yes, in some form, whatever we believe, religious or spiritually, like we will still in some way be with the ones we love. Yeah. Oh, this is bringing up something else, which is like, so, you know, we've talked a lot about Laika, and I talk about a lot about Laika in like other author interviews and stuff, but we don't often talk about like the humans, like in the book. And there is like one prominent human, Vlad, who is the scientist who introduces Laika to the space journey, and he, of course, is based on. There you go. There's Vlad, and he is based on the real life. Scientist Vladimir Yostovsky, who was a part of the experiment that was launching Laika into space on Sputnik 2. And he, in real life, actually really did bring Laika back to his home before the launch to let her play with his kids and feed her a steak. And when asked why, he said he felt sorry for her because she had so little time left to live. And I guess, you know, so we have a reader's guide at the back of the book for parents and adults who are reading with kids to have discussions with them about like, what does this book mean to them? There it is in the back. And one of the questions is, do you think Vlad is a hero or a villain, which means a bad guy, of course. And so I'm just wanting to, I've never really asked you this. Do you think that Vlad is a hero or a villain?
I think there's no one who's either or in this world. I think he's human, and we've all made decisions that are difficult, that have hurt others, that are against our values, or they might not even be against our values, but they just hurt, and they might harm people. And I think that's part of existing. And I think it's important to kind of settle into that ambiguity and that unknown, that you can be both at the same time and neither, that sometimes you just are what you are. And part of that is having pain, regrets, and hopes. And sometimes you do sacrifice others to succeed, or others will sacrifice you also, depending on your positionality and your power, you know. So it doesn't mean that there aren't regrets and there aren't feelings, but I think also recognizing who has power and who has less power, but also at the same time who has agency and who doesn't have agency. And I think it's very easy. I think we sometimes hear a lot of scripts, and we've talked about this before, about of like, inherently, because of certain dynamics in society, you can have no agency and no power. And I think there is a big debate about that, but it is also like, how do we also honor people's agency if that is part of their story that they're telling and that they believe, and not projecting onto that as well. And I think that's one of the subtleties that I appreciated around like, is that it's this idea that she is choosing, you know, and it's important to honor that regardless of the complexities of what happened. And in that, it's also honoring that the connection she had with Vlad also could have been beautiful too, you know?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it was so important to me. As you know, that this story was true to history in many ways, but also gave Laika a voice and real agency, like her own decision, her own reason for wanting to go to meet the stars. And I mean, this thing about is Vlad a hero or villain, of course, is like, you know, your answer is the same answer I would have given, which is like, I don't think there are heroes or villains really. And this is really part of, like, for me, like writing for children is like those kids that I worked with, particularly in hospital settings, had some big questions about the grownups in their lives. Like kids who, for example, were no longer living with their birth families would ask, like, why didn't my birth family want me to keep living with them? Or they would say, why did mommy or daddy or, you know, uncle or grandma, whoever, treat me in this way that was not good? We would have to be able to talk about, like, oh, you know, the grownups in your life really love you and sometimes make decisions that weren't good, and they make mistakes, and they come back, and you also sometimes can make mistakes, and that's that's part of being human, and you're still lovable. It's still I think that's what it comes back to, is like, we make mistakes, but we're still lovable. And that's sort of at the heart of this book too, is like allowing us to be messy and allowing us to be complicated. We're almost coming to the end. Okay, do you want to do one last question for each other?
Okay. I'm trying to think.
I can go first, or you can go first.
Go ahead.
All right. What is your favorite type of dog?
I don't have favorites.
I knew that was going to stress you out.
And I also I personally think that mutts are beautiful. And like
Truly.
Laika was a mutt as well. She did that on purpose.
Oh, dude, okay, your turn.
So this might be too big of a question, but I'm going to ask. But do you think you would have chosen to go to the stars if you had the chance?
Always, even knowing that there was a risk. When somebody gives you the opportunity to do something meaningful, I can't turn that away. There's always something about discovery that I can't say no to. So
that's beautiful. And I will stand by you as you soar happily.
You can be my star. Thank you so much for doing this interview.
Thank you. It was so nice to chat about this. We haven't actually talked much about Laika, so this was nice.
Yeah, this is really nice. This is great. Thanks again to Word on the Street for having us. And for those watching, if you're interested in reading more about Laika and Vlad and the stars, you can find For Laika at your favorite local independent bookstore. One of my very favorites here in Toronto is Another Story Bookshop on Roncesvalles. They're fantastic. All the people who work there are just really, really deep lovers of books and children's books, and just really want to encourage people to go out and support them. Em, you have any favorite local bookshops?
Can I name 3?
But of course.
So of course, Drawn and Quarterly in Montreal, and Racine as well in Montreal. There are 2 wonderful bookstores, and Massey's Books in Vancouver is also fantastic as well. And I'm going to add another one, and Audrey's Bookstore in Edmonton, where I'm born and raised. So.
Oh, lovely. We should just make a video where we list all of our favorite independent bookstores.
I know. Now I'm thinking of all the ones I didn't mention, and I'm like, oh no.
We love all of them.
We love all of them.
So thank you so much, everyone, for watching. This has been a delight. Thanks, Yun Ching. Thanks to Word on the Street.
Thank you.
Again. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye now.
Bye.